Okay, so we've been dealing with assimilation. We've been looking at this idea of assimilation. We've been introduced to a number of different conceptions of assimilation. Most of these have dealt with America, but some of these dynamics exist in Thai society. How people enter the middle class, forms of discrimination, periods in Thai history where there have been forced assimilation, closing of Chinese schools, banning of Chinese newspapers, banning of the Malay language, banning of wearing certain dresses, wearing sarongs. People were told in the 1930s that there were ways that Thais dressed. So we've dealt a bit with assimilation, and now we're going to begin going through another round, which is based on Chapter 5, Modes of Incorporation. And we're going to be looking at modes of incorporation, not through assimilation, but multiculturalism. So we're going to go into full screen now, and let's just work our way through this. We'll go into full screen now, and we'll work our way through this. It's a truism to say that the world's major advanced industrial nations have become increasingly diverse. The assertiveness of long marginalised Indigenous people in North America, in Australia, in Finland, in Sweden, has helped to make diversity increasingly visible. The same can be said of movements of ethno-nationalist minorities. The greater autonomy or even independence and the Scots and the Welsh in Britain, the Basque, the Catalan in Spain, and the Quebecois in Canada. Finally, the third factor contributing to growing diversity is immigration. Indeed, despite deep ambivalence and often with considerable levels of opposition, these nations have become countries of new immigrants. These include large numbers of immigrants from Turkey and Germany, Muslims from North Africa and France, Afro-Caribbeans and Asians from the Indian subcontinent and Britain, and Chinese and Indians in Canada, and Mexicans, Chinese, Koreans, Indians in the US. It also includes some smaller numbers of a wide array of ethnic groups in all of these countries and in similar ones. So multiculturalism has its critics. When people seek to depict a society as diverse, they use as a synonym the term multiculturalism. Ever since the word entered the vocabularies of ordinary people and multiculturalism became a reality, it has had its vocal critics. And there are some names mentioned in the United States in the 1990s. Both of these feared that multiculturalism, not as a description of diversity, but perceived to be a political agenda, which was essentially divisive. So the former was concerned with disuniting America, while the latter feared that it might be emerging as the twilight of the common dream. So very famously, people like Samuel Huntington perceived that there was a clash of civilizations around the corner between the West and the Muslim world. His views have been widely discredited. Multiculturalism comes in a number of forms. Young's position called for the creation of what she called differentiated citizenship. This type of citizenship places a premium on group differences, including distinctive group rights. She repudiates the idea of universally shared values and worldviews, contending that all they amount to is a projection of the values of the worldview of any society's dominant group. So in other words, from her perspective, any effort to arrive at a sense of common purpose and a shared identity is inevitably assimilationist, a form of incorporation resulting from socially excluded groups being integrated by embracing the values of the dominant group. So she's been widely criticised on the part of soft multiculturalists. Some have pointed out that Young's understanding of who in the US qualifies for differentiated rights is so broad that something like 75% of the population would qualify, including but not simply limited to main racial groups in the society, but women, gays, lesbians, and members of the working class. What she does in making this case is to treat the idea of culture so loosely that where she sees distinctive cultures, others would perceive variance within cultures, within a culture. Beyond this, what serves to distinguish Young's version of multiculturalism from other more moderate positions is that it promotes group insularity and social fragmentation. It does so because it fails to reckon with the fact that most people are capable of seeing both the distinctive perspective of their own group and at the same time understand the limits of that perspective and the virtues of also seeing things from the advantage of larger society. So, for example, Alexander criticised Young for promoting philosophic position that he calls recognition without solidarity, on which he means that in claiming to be respected and accorded distinctive rights, members of the group in question do not, in the end, establish bonds of attachment and allegiance to members of other groups. So there are also moderate multiculturalists. While the moderate multiculturalists cited above have all developed original theoretical statements, for our purposes, the similarities amongst these features are far more important than the difference. To begin with, in contrast to Young, they see multiculturalism as a mechanism for including the members of groups that have thus far been socially excluded. Alexander depicts multiculturalism as a new mode of incorporation, and insofar as this is the case, it represents an alternative to assimilation. Likewise, others refer to multiculturalism as a form of integration. Multiculturalism does not refer to a social process of group interaction, but rather a moral choice built on an idea of recognition. Taylor is perhaps the most important of the multiculturalists to advance the claim that multiculturalism ought to be construed as a preferred mode of incorporation because, unlike assimilation, it takes seriously the idea that people's cultural backgrounds constitute an integral element of their sense of self. Because of this, it is reasonable to conclude that creating an opportunity to have one's cultural identity recognised in public by others represents a just and equitable way to approach difference. As such, it constitutes a politics of identity, one committed to the promotion of cultural authenticity. So I think what we'll do is we'll just pause there now. And when we pick up again, having looked at multiculturalism, we're going to be addressing the issue of what is called transnationalism and contemporary immigration when we come to understand modes of incorporation.